The moment Tony Beets stormed onto the big screen in Gold Rush Season 2, it was instantly clear that this man was no ordinary miner. He was trouble wrapped in determination. From the very beginning, whispers followed him like a shadow. Fellow miners exchanged uneasy glances, and insiders raised their eyebrows as rumors began to swirl. Yet, the world was too captivated by his massive dredges, booming voice, and unforgettable Dutch accent to notice the warning signs. The signs were there all along. Signs that hinted at the chaos that would unfold if anyone dared to cross the self-proclaimed king of the Klondike. No one listened. No one took heed. And now, what started as simple reality TV drama had evolved into something far more explosive. The question was no longer why we didn't listen, but how we managed to miss every clue that pointed to the force of nature known as Tony Beets. Tony Beets was born on December 15, 1959, in the small rural village of Weidenes, nestled in the Dutch countryside. Though it might have seemed like the middle of nowhere, Weidenes was a quiet farming community in North Holland where hard work defined a person's worth. Growing up in the 1960s and 70s, Tony's childhood was shaped by long days of labor, harsh weather, and a culture that valued grit over comfort. From an early age, he learned that complaining achieved nothing. If you wanted something, you had to earn it with your hands. His early world was built on the rough landscapes of farmland and the wisdom of people who believed in the dignity of physical work. Tony attended local schools, but he often admitted that academic life never suited him. Sitting still in a classroom felt like confinement. He wanted action, not lectures and paperwork. Once he finished basic schooling, he turned his focus toward learning practical skills that could actually change his life. But life in the Netherlands during the 1970s didn't offer much opportunity. If Tony had stayed, his path would have been predictable. Work the land, earn a modest living, and raise a family in the same small town. Yet modesty was never part of Tony Beets' DNA. He hungered for more challenge, more adventure, more success. During his early adulthood, Tony met Minnie, the woman who would become both his wife and his lifelong business partner. The two shared a deep understanding of hard work and risk. They agreed that comfort wasn't something handed out. It had to be fought for. Both had grown up in harsh rural environments and knew that there was a bigger world beyond their village. They married young and quickly began to dream of a life that offered more freedom and opportunity. For them, that dream was Canada, a land of wide-open spaces and untapped potential. In 1984, at just 24 years old, Tony packed up everything he owned and, with Minnie by his side, immigrated to Canada. They arrived with almost nothing. No savings, no jobs, and no guarantees. But what they did have was belief in themselves and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Settling in British Columbia, Tony took any job he could find. The first few years were humbling. He worked construction, labored on sites, and took on whatever physical work would put food on the table. Life was tough, and the language barrier only made it harder. Yet despite financial hardship, Tony never thought about quitting. To him, failure was simply not an option. It was during these early years that Tony first heard whispers about the Yukon Territory, a place with a legendary history of gold. The Yukon was harsh, isolated, and unforgiving, but to Tony it represented hope. He decided to take another leap of faith, this time moving his family to Dawson City. There he started from the bottom, working for established mining operations, learning every piece of machinery and absorbing every bit of knowledge about gold extraction. The Dutch farm boy who once worked the soil now found his true calling in the frozen wilderness of the north. Through perseverance and backbreaking effort, Tony became a respected figure in the Yukon mining world. Alongside Minnie, he built both a thriving family and a growing mining business. They welcomed 4 children, Kevin, Monica, Mike, and Bianca, and Tony made it his mission to teach them the same lessons he'd learned as a boy. Nothing in life comes easy. Over the decades, Tony transformed from an unknown immigrant laborer into one of the Yukon's most successful miners. By his 50s, he was running one of the largest and most efficient mining operations in the Klondike. When the Discovery Channel came calling in 2010, Tony was already a legend among miners, owning multiple claims and massive equipment fleets. But beyond Dawson City, few had ever heard of him. Gold Rush producers wanted a real professional to contrast with Todd Hoffman's team of amateurs, and Tony fit the bill perfectly. At first, he wasn't keen on letting cameras into his life. He wasn't looking for fame or drama. He was a miner, not an entertainer. But eventually, the promise of exposure and new business opportunities convinced him to give it a try. When Tony Beets finally appeared on Gold Rush in 2011, everything changed. His tough-as-nails demeanor, thick Dutch accent, and blunt honesty made him an instant fan favorite. Viewers admired his no-nonsense attitude. When something broke, he fixed it. When someone messed up, he called them out without hesitation. His fiery temper and relentless work ethic created some of the show's most memorable moments. To fans, Tony represented an old-school kind of toughness that had all but disappeared. The show transformed his mining business into a recognizable brand. He gained better deals with suppliers, drew investors, and expanded his operations. But fame also came with a price. His private life was no longer private, and every decision, both personal and professional, was open to public scrutiny. Still, Tony adapted. He used his platform to showcase his expertise, proving that he wasn't just a reality TV personality, he was the real deal. But beneath that hardened exterior was a man whose temper could shake even the toughest crew members. Tony's anger, once provoked, was legendary. His explosive outbursts made for incredible television, but also revealed the darker side of his personality. Crew members who crossed him often stayed silent, too afraid to challenge his authority. Despite this, Tony's fierce loyalty to his family and passion for mining earned him a complex reputation. Half hero, half tyrant. In the end, Tony Beets became more than a miner or a television star. He became a symbol of unfiltered determination. He embodied the rugged spirit of the Klondike, bold, stubborn, and relentless. Behind every argument, every explosion of anger, and every ounce of gold he pulled from the ground was a man who had fought his way from a small Dutch village to the frozen heart of the Yukon and refused to back down. Tony Beets didn't just appear on Gold Rush, he reshaped it. He brought a new level of ambition and professionalism to the show that no one could ignore. His large-scale dredging operations, massive equipment purchases, and multi-million-dollar mining ventures transformed the show from a simple mining reality series into something much bigger. When Tony bought a 75-year-old dredge, he devoted entire seasons to restoring it, piece by piece, until it roared back to life. Viewers were no longer watching just a mining process. They were witnessing an engineering spectacle unfold in real time. Through his meticulous work, Tony showed audiences exactly what a successful, thriving mining enterprise looked like. However, Tony's presence on the show wasn't just defined by his skill, it was also marked by conflict. His relationships with other Gold Rush cast members swung between mentorship and outright hostility. With Tony, there was no middle ground. He firmly believed he had earned his place at the top and demanded the respect that came with it. His interactions with Todd Hoffman, for instance, were charged with tension from the very beginning. Todd represented everything Tony despised in a miner. He was inexperienced, overly optimistic, and in Tony's eyes, dangerously unrealistic. To Tony, those traits equaled incompetence. Their early encounters were filled with verbal clashes and sharp criticism, and Tony made no effort to conceal his disdain for how Todd managed his mining operations. He viewed Todd as a pretender in the field, someone who wanted the recognition of a true miner without having put in the years of sweat and sacrifice it required. Todd Hoffman was just one of the many people who found themselves on the wrong side of Tony Beets. Other cast members often chose to keep their distance, giving Tony and his crew space to operate independently. Yet, the show's producers noticed something significant. Tony's fiery personality and constant clashes drew in viewers. In the world of reality television, more drama meant higher ratings. Every argument and every outburst translated into better numbers. But behind the scenes, the warning signs about Tony's temperament were impossible to ignore. After several seasons, Tony had earned a reputation that everyone could define: brilliant, ruthless, and unpredictable. But in October 2014, his confidence would lead him into serious trouble. While filming for Season 6, one of Tony's crew members poured gasoline into a dredge pond at Indian River and set it ablaze, a spectacle they called the Viking baptism. Tony stood before the flames with his arms raised high as cameras rolled, fully approving the act. What looked like a bold show of dominance was actually a serious environmental offense. Tony and his company, Tamarack Inc., had violated the Yukon Waters Act by dumping hazardous materials into protected waters and failing to report it. Although a crew member named Mark Favron later claimed the idea was his, everyone knew the ultimate responsibility rested with Tony, the boss. The legal consequences didn't surface until 3 years later. In August 2017, Tony and Tamarack Inc. were fined $31,000 for the stunt, while Mark paid just $117.25. Tony eventually admitted he should have stopped it, saying, "Since I am the man running the show, I guess I should have told him not to do it." His remorse seemed shallow, surfacing only when it cost him money. Shockingly, Discovery Channel still aired the footage, showing Tony committing a clear environmental violation on television. Instead of removing him, the show treated it like a minor incident, proving that as long as Tony attracted viewers, the rules didn't apply to him. Tony's attitude of invincibility soon began affecting his relationships, especially with fellow miner Parker Schnabel. What began as a mentor-student dynamic quickly deteriorated into constant conflict. Tony was perpetually critical, demanding, and stingy with praise. No matter what Parker did, it was never good enough. Their clashes became one of the defining dramas of Gold Rush, with both men's egos too large to back down. Though they later collaborated at the Dominion mine, the partnership was uneasy. By then, they were no longer mentor and apprentice, but competitive equals, too strong-willed, men forced to work side by side while silently resenting each other. But Tony's most heartbreaking and destructive feud wasn't with a fellow miner. It was with his own son, Kevin Beets. During Season 14, the tension between father and son reached a boiling point when Kevin expressed his desire to take over Tony's Southeast Alaska gold claim. Tony refused, unwilling to relinquish control or trust his son's leadership. The situation quickly turned toxic. Feeling suffocated by his father's dominance, Kevin walked away mid-season, abandoning the family operation altogether. His departure wasn't just a business decision, it was an act of emotional exhaustion. The Beets family was furious, but deep down, they understood. Tony was notoriously difficult to work with, and everyone in the mining community knew it. Even after taking a year off from mining, Kevin's return in Season 15 brought no real change. Tony remained the same, demanding, controlling, and unwilling to acknowledge anyone's efforts. Kevin's ongoing struggle for independence mirrored what countless others had experienced under Tony's leadership. Mike Beets, another of Tony's sons, also bore the weight of his father's expectations. When Mike accidentally flipped a $300,000 wash plant while trying to correct a previous mistake, Tony's disappointment was explosive. It wasn't the first time Mike had failed to meet his father's impossible standards. Although Mike was capable and experienced, the immense pressure to satisfy Tony led to repeated mistakes. Working under Tony Beets wasn't just challenging, it was emotionally exhausting. The same environment extended to Tony's crew, who often endured his harsh treatment and relentless criticism. What some might call tough love often crossed the line into verbal and psychological abuse. Yet, Discovery Channel turned these conflicts into entertainment. Tony's explosive temper, his legal issues, and his family disputes all became part of the show's attraction. Despite his controversies, Tony Beets emerged as one of the most successful and wealthiest figures in Gold Rush history. His empire and work ethic earned him the title King of the Klondike. However, that crown came at a price. His reputation among colleagues deteriorated, and his relationships with his sons were left fractured. His crew followed him out of fear and financial dependency rather than genuine loyalty. Tony's empire was built on domination, not harmony. To outsiders, his perfectionism looked like the mark of an expert. To those closest to him, it was a toxic burden. The constant fights with his sons were framed as discipline. his clashes with Parker as competitive spirit. But beneath it all, Tony Beets' behavior reflected deeper issues that no one wanted to confront. Discovery Channel continued to profit from his volatility, showcasing it as good television, while the real emotional and relational costs went unseen. In the end, Tony Beets paid a hidden price for his success. The bridges he burned, within his family, his crew, and his peers, were the true casualties of his empire. Long after the cameras stop rolling and the fame fades, those consequences will remain, echoing louder than the clamor of gold dredges or television ratings. The phrase, "the entertainment factor," perfectly sums up the foundation upon which Gold Rush and its drama were built. From the very beginning, Discovery Channel understood that reality television thrived on spectacle, conflict, and raw emotion. The network knew it wasn't just capturing gold mining, it was packaging a product that audiences couldn't look away from. So when Tony Beets stormed onto the screen with his booming voice and fiery temper, Discovery saw not a problem, but an opportunity. They didn't simply broadcast his behavior, they crafted it, shaped it, and sold it for maximum impact. Every heated exchange, every explosive argument, every curse-filled moment was turned into television gold. The editing team made sure to heighten the tension with dramatic music and close-up shots. A 5-minute outburst could easily be stretched into a full-blown narrative that lasted an entire season, keeping viewers on edge and eager for more. In this setup, Tony's outbursts weren't seen as flaws, they became his trademark. Discovery marketed his temper and blunt personality as the essence of authenticity. His larger-than-life persona was framed as old-school toughness, something audiences associated with grit and honesty. The irony was that this behavior, often harsh and toxic, was repackaged as entertainment. The more Tony yelled at his crew or clashed with his family, the higher the ratings climbed. Social media buzzed after every confrontation, and online discussions fueled even more viewership. Discovery realized that conflict equaled engagement, and engagement meant money. Intervening to soften Tony's management style would have meant tampering with their golden goose. After all, the chaos was what kept fans coming back week after week. As Gold Rush grew, Tony Beets became the face of what many described as tough love in the modern age. His explosive demeanor was framed as a kind of rugged masculinity, celebrated rather than questioned. Viewers and critics often excused his behavior by saying he came from a different generation, one that valued hard work over sensitivity. This narrative stopped many people from seeing the deeper issue, the normalization of cruelty and anger in the workplace. The show subtly painted this as the price of success, yet the audience continued to consume it eagerly, and Tony's fame and wealth only grew. Whether time will mellow him or reveal even rougher edges remains to be seen. But his image as the unshakable patriarch of the Yukon is now cemented in TV history. When Discovery Channel stumbled upon the idea of Gold Rush, they didn't realize they had struck narrative gold. The timing was perfect. Small-scale gold mining in Alaska was gaining real-world attention, and the network saw an opportunity to turn it into gripping television. What they created was not just a documentary about miners, but a modern-day parable about risk, hope, and the American dream. They didn't want established experts. They wanted dreamers, ordinary people who were desperate enough to gamble everything. That's how Todd Hoffman and his inexperienced Oregon crew came into the picture. They sold their homes, maxed out their credit cards, borrowed equipment, and set off for Alaska with little more than determination and faith. Their struggles, failures, and fleeting successes made for must-see TV. When Gold Rush premiered in 2010, it struck a chord with over 3 million viewers each week. America was still recovering from financial hardship, and audiences saw themselves in these miners, ordinary people trying to change their fortunes. As the series evolved, Discovery knew it needed new energy to keep the audience hooked. That's when Tony Beets joined the show. His arrival introduced an old-school element, contrasting the inexperienced rookies with someone who had lived and breathed mining for decades. Over time, the show expanded in every direction: new miners, new challenges, and new territories. Parker Schnabel rose from a teenager working on his grandfather's claim to one of the youngest, most successful miners in the Yukon. Rick Ness branched out on his own, while the Hoffmans ventured across Alaska, Oregon, Guyana, and Colorado before eventually leaving the series after season 8. What started as a single crew adventure evolved into a sprawling saga of ambition and endurance. Gold Rush soon became Discovery's crown jewel, spawning multiple spin-offs such as Gold Rush, The Dirt, a behind-the-scenes recap show, White Water, where miners risked their lives underwater, and Parker's Trail, which followed Parker exploring historical mining regions. Even Winter's Fortune took the drama to freezing extremes. By its 10th season, Gold Rush had become the network's longest-running and most successful series, with viewers eagerly tuning in every Friday night to see who would strike it rich or fall apart trying. Discovery's mastery of editing was its secret weapon. While the show was presented as reality, much of its power came from how the footage was shaped. The struggles, equipment breakdowns, unpredictable weather, financial strain, and personal clashes were all very real, but the storytelling turned them into captivating arcs. Viewers related to those moments because they mirrored the hardships of everyday life. When the pandemic hit in 2020, the stakes rose again. By season 15 in 2024, Gold Rush remained one of Discovery's highest-performing franchises. The network's focus on entertainment and adaptation paid off. With social media engagement, streaming exclusives, and larger-than-ever operations, the show had evolved into a television empire. Gone were the modest wash plants and rented machines of Season 1. Now miners were running multi-million-dollar operations with fleets of massive excavators. The once small-time dreamers had become industrial titans. Parker's goals skyrocketed from 1,000 ounces of gold per season to over 10,000. And Tony wasn't the only veteran expert anymore. Yet, through all the expansion and spectacle, one thing never changed: the heart of the story. Gold Rush remained a testament to human grit, family legacy, and the unrelenting drive to push forward despite the odds. Tony Beets stood as the embodiment of that ethos. Love him or hate him, his name became synonymous with perseverance and raw determination. Every nugget of gold he dug symbolized the triumph of willpower over adversity. And while his methods and temper continued to divide fans, there's no denying that his relentless spirit helped shape one of the most successful reality series of all time. Behind all the roaring engines and flying gravel lies something far deeper than entertainment. It's a story about ordinary people chasing extraordinary dreams. Whether Tony ever softens his tough exterior or continues to rule with iron grit remains uncertain. But Discovery's gamble, to film a group of miners chasing gold, became an enduring success story. It turned working-class laborers into cultural icons and inspired countless others to take risks of their own. As long as there's gold to dig and stories to tell, the Gold Rush legacy and Tony Beets' legend will continue to gleam in the harsh light of the Yukon sun.